Victoria Sterling Hawthorne adjusted her diamond tennis bracelet for the third time in 10 minutes, the motion as automatic as her breathing. The mahogany-paneled courtroom felt beneath her station, filled with what she considered ordinary people who dared to challenge her family's retail empire. Her $3,000 Hermes handbag sat primly on her lap as she glared at the plaintiff's table where Maria Santos sat with trembling hands. "Your Honor," Victoria's attorney began, his voice carrying the polished confidence that money could buy. "My client categorically denies any wrongdoing in the termination of Ms. Santos. The plaintiff was let go for legitimate performance issues, not because of her pregnancy as she alleges." Judge Patricia Chen studied the case files with practiced eyes that had seen countless employment disputes. This one, however, carried a particular edge of cruelty that made her stomach turn. The evidence painted a picture of systematic harassment, deliberate schedule changes designed to force a pregnant woman to quit, and finally, termination delivered with surgical precision the day after Maria announced her pregnancy to her supervisor. Victoria whispered harshly to her attorney, her voice carrying further than intended. "This is ridiculous. That woman should be grateful she even had a job. Do you know who my family is? We employ half this pathetic town." The courtroom fell silent. Judge Chen's gaze sharpened like a blade finding its target. "Mrs. Sterling Hawthorne," Judge Chen said, her voice cutting through the tension, "would you care to repeat that statement for the court record?" Victoria's face flushed, but her arrogance burned brighter than her embarrassment. She stood without permission, her chin lifted in defiance. "I said that woman should be grateful. My family's stores provide jobs for hundreds of people in this community. If someone can't handle the demands of retail work, perhaps they should consider a different career path that better suits their limitations." The collective intake of breath from the gallery was audible. Maria Santos began to cry quietly, her husband's arm tightening around her shoulders. "Furthermore," Victoria continued, emboldened by what she perceived as attention rather than horror, "pregnancy is a choice. If you choose to get pregnant, you choose to accept the consequences. Businesses can't be expected to coddle every woman who decides to have a baby." Judge Chen's knuckles whitened as she gripped her gavel. "Mrs. Sterling Hawthorne, you are in contempt of court. Bailiff, please escort." "Contempt?" Victoria shrieked, her carefully maintained facade cracking like expensive porcelain. "Do you know what my family contributes to this community? My father donated the wing to the Children's Hospital. We sponsor half the charity events in this city. I will not be held in contempt by some what, Mrs. Sterling Hawthorne?" Judge Chen asked, her voice dangerously quiet. Victoria's mouth opened and closed, her privilege warring with the last remnants of her social awareness. The courtroom waited in electric silence. "Some person who clearly doesn't understand how the real world works," Victoria finally spat. "This is America. Business owners have rights too." The gavel came down like thunder. "Contempt of court. Bailiff, please place Mrs. Sterling Hawthorne in custody immediately." As the bailiff approached with handcuffs, Victoria's face transformed from flushed anger to pale shock. "You can't do this to me. Do you know who I am? Do you know who my family is?" The heavy courtroom doors opened with a sound like fate itself arriving, and every head turned toward the entrance where a woman in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit stood silhouetted against the hallway light. The handcuffs clicked around Victoria's wrists with a sound that seemed to echo through her entire world. Her perfectly manicured hands, which had never known real work, now bore the cold metal that marked her fall from untouchable to accountable. The shame burned hotter than her anger as she realized every person in the courtroom was staring at her downfall. "This is insane," Victoria hissed at her attorney, who was frantically shuffling papers and avoiding eye contact. "Call my father. Call the mayor. Someone needs to fix this immediately." Judge Chen observed the scene with grim satisfaction. In 23 years on the bench, she had witnessed countless displays of privilege and entitlement, but Victoria's performance ranked among the most disturbing. The young woman's complete lack of empathy for Maria Santos, combined with her assumption that wealth granted immunity from consequences, represented everything wrong with unchecked privilege. "Mrs. Sterling Hawthorne," Judge Chen announced, her voice carrying to every corner of the courtroom. You are hereby held in contempt of court for your disruptive behavior and blatant disrespect for these proceedings. You will spend the next 48 hours in county detention to consider your conduct. Victoria's shriek could have shattered crystal. 48 hours in jail with criminals? Judge, you cannot be serious. I have a charity luncheon tomorrow and the country club board meeting on Thursday. These people depend on me. The absurdity of her priorities sent ripples of shocked murmurs through the gallery. Maria Santos looked up from her tears, amazement replacing despair as she watched her former boss face consequences for the first time in her privileged life. Furthermore, Judge Chen continued, I am awarding summary judgment in favor of the plaintiff. Mrs. Sterling Hawthorne's statements today constitute clear admission of discriminatory intent. Ms. Santos, you are awarded $200,000 in damages plus attorney fees and court costs. Victoria's knees buckled, but the bailiff's firm grip kept her upright. $200,000 was significant even for her family's wealth, but the public humiliation cut deeper than any financial loss. Her reputation, carefully cultivated through years of charity galas and society pages, lay in ruins. This is impossible, she gasped, her voice breaking. My mother will hear about this. She'll fix everything. She always fixes everything. Her attorney finally found his voice. Your Honor, my client is clearly distraught. Perhaps we could arrange bail and no bail for contempt of court, Judge Chen interrupted. Mrs. Sterling Hawthorne will serve her full sentence. Perhaps 48 hours of reflection will help her develop some perspective on her behavior. As the bailiff began to lead Victoria away, her expensive heels clicking against the marble floor like a countdown to her disgrace, she twisted around to scan the courtroom. Her eyes desperately sought her mother's familiar figure, the woman who had always swooped in to clean up her messes with checkbooks and connections. Where is she? Victoria demanded, her voice cracking with panic. My mother should be here. She always comes when I need her. The bailiff paused as Victoria planted her feet, refusing to move toward the door that led to her cell. Her desperation was palpable. A drowning woman reaching for a lifeline that had always appeared before. My mother works for the government, Victoria announced to the courtroom as if this revelation would change everything. Important work. National security. She can make one phone call and end this nightmare. The silence that followed her declaration felt different somehow, charged with an electricity that made several people in the gallery shift uncomfortably. Judge Chen's expression remained impassive, but something flickered behind her eyes. Victoria's voice rose to near hysteria. Helen Sterling doesn't let anyone hurt her family. Not judges, not lawyers, not anyone. When she finds out what you've done to me, you'll regret every word you've spoken today. The heavy doors at the back of the courtroom remained closed. The woman in the charcoal suit stepped into the courtroom with the measured pace of someone accustomed to entering rooms where her presence changed everything. Helen Sterling moved like controlled water, fluid yet purposeful, her gray hair pulled back in a style that suggested efficiency over fashion. Her unremarkable appearance was deliberate. In her line of work, memorable faces were liabilities. Victoria's eyes lit up with desperate relief. Mom, thank God you're here. This insane judge has completely lost her mind. She's trying to put me in jail like some common criminal. You need to make some calls and fix this right now. Helen's expression remained neutral as she took in the scene. Her daughter in handcuffs, the bailiff waiting patiently, Judge Chen observing everything with sharp eyes, and Maria Santos clutching her husband's hand at the plaintiff's table. 30 years of intelligence work had taught Helen to assess situations before reacting, and what she saw made her stomach clench with familiar dread. Your Honor, Helen said, her voice carrying an authority that seemed to emerge from nowhere. I'm Helen Sterling, Victoria's mother. Might I have a moment to understand the situation? Judge Chen nodded slowly. Something about Helen Sterling triggered her instincts. The woman's posture, her manner of speaking, the way she commanded attention without demanding it. Your daughter was held in contempt for disrupting these proceedings and making discriminatory statements that constitute admission of guilt in an employment discrimination case. Helen turned to study her daughter, really look at her, perhaps for the first time in years. Victoria had grown up insulated by wealth and privilege, shielded from consequences by family influence and money. Helen had built that shield, believing she was protecting her only child. Now she realized she had created a monster. "What exactly did she say?" Helen asked quietly. Victoria started to speak, but Helen raised a single finger, a gesture that had silenced a room full of senior intelligence officials, and her daughter's mouth snapped shut. Judge Chen consulted her notes. She stated that pregnant women should be grateful for employment, that pregnancy is a choice that comes with consequences businesses shouldn't have to accommodate, and that her family's charitable contributions should exempt her from following employment law. Helen closed her eyes briefly, and when she opened them, Victoria saw something that terrified her more than handcuffs or jail cells. Disappointment so profound, it seemed to reshape her mother's features. "Ms. Santos," Helen said, turning to the plaintiff, "I want you to know that my daughter's words don't represent our family's values. What happened to you was wrong, and I'm genuinely sorry." Victoria stared at her mother in shock. "Mom, what are you doing? You're supposed to fix this, not apologize to her. Call Director Morrison or Senator Phillips or someone who can make this disappear." Helen's voice, when she spoke, carried ice that could freeze fire. "Victoria Elizabeth Sterling Hawthorne, you will be quiet. Now." The courtroom had never been so silent. Even the court reporter's fingers paused over her keyboard. "Your Honor," Helen continued, "I won't be making any calls on my daughter's behalf. She needs to face the consequences of her actions. However, I would like to request permission to address the court regarding my daughter's character, if I may." Judge Chen leaned forward, intrigued despite herself. "You may proceed, Mrs. Sterling." Helen straightened her shoulders, and suddenly, everyone in the courtroom could sense the steel beneath her unremarkable exterior. "For 30 years I've worked in intelligence services, protecting this country and its values. I've sacrificed time with my family, missed birthdays and holidays, and made enemies of dangerous people to defend the principles that make America great." Victoria's face went white as realization began to dawn. "One of those principles," Helen continued, "is that all people deserve equal treatment under the law, regardless of their circumstances. My daughter has violated that principle in the worst possible way." Helen Sterling walked to the center of the courtroom, positioning herself where everyone could see her clearly. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable. The unassuming government worker was gone, replaced by someone accustomed to briefing presidents and making decisions that affected national security. "Your Honor, my daughter believes that her family connections can solve any problem," Helen began, her voice carrying throughout the silent courtroom. "She's not entirely wrong. For 30 years I've worked for the Central Intelligence Agency, rising through the ranks to become Deputy Director of Operations. I have contacts in every level of government, from local prosecutors to Supreme Court justices." Victoria's face showed confusion mixed with hope. This was the power play she had expected, the revelation that would set everything right. "However," Helen continued, and the single word fell like a guillotine blade, "I will not use a single one of those contacts to help my daughter escape justice." The hope died in Victoria's eyes, replaced by dawning horror. "In my work, I've seen what happens when people believe they're above the law," Helen said, her gaze moving across the courtroom. "I've witnessed dictators who thought their power made them untouchable, criminals who believed their wealth granted immunity, and yes, Americans who forgot that privilege comes with responsibility." Judge Chen found herself leaning forward, captivated by this unexpected turn. "Ms. Santos," Helen said, turning to address the plaintiff directly, "what my daughter did to you is a form of terrorism, economic terrorism that uses power to crush the vulnerable. In my professional opinion, such behavior represents a threat to the stability of our society." Maria Santos looked up through her tears, seeing something in Helen's eyes that spoke of understanding and genuine remorse. "Victoria," Helen said, finally addressing her daughter, "do you know what I've been doing while you've been living off the family money and treating people like servants?" Victoria could only shake her head, the handcuffs seeming to grow heavier with each passing moment. I've been tracking a domestic terrorism cell that targets immigrant families and pregnant women. They use economic pressure, workplace harassment, and systematic discrimination to drive people from their communities. Their methods are identical to what you did to Ms. Santos. The courtroom held its collective breath. In fact, Helen continued, reaching into her briefcase and withdrawing a thick folder, your store has been under federal investigation for 6 months. We have documented evidence of pattern discrimination against pregnant women, immigrants, and minorities. The Department of Justice will be filing federal charges next week. Victoria's attorney went pale, frantically scribbling notes as he finally understood the true scope of the disaster. But here's what really breaks my heart, Helen said, her professional composure cracking slightly. I've spent 3 decades fighting to protect the American dream, the idea that anyone can succeed here through hard work and determination. You've spent that same time using your privilege to destroy that dream for others. Helen turned to Judge Chen with a formal nod. Your Honor, I have a request. As a federal official with significant security clearance, I am willing to personally guarantee my daughter's appearance for any future proceedings. However, I believe she should serve her full contempt sentence. She needs to understand that actions have consequences. Victoria finally found her voice, and it came out as a strangled scream. You're destroying me. You're my mother. You're supposed to protect me. Helen's response was quiet, but devastating. I am protecting you, Victoria. I'm protecting you from becoming a monster. And I'm protecting everyone else from the monster you've already become. The bailiff began to lead Victoria toward the door again, but she turned back one final time, her voice breaking with desperation and rage. You'll regret this, Mom. When Daddy finds out what you've done, when the family lawyers hear about this, you'll regret choosing strangers over your own daughter. Helen's reply followed Victoria to the door. Your father died ashamed of what you'd become. I won't. The county detention center's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows that no amount of expensive makeup could soften. Victoria sat on the narrow concrete bench in her holding cell, her designer dress wrinkled and her perfectly styled hair disheveled from clutching her head in disbelief. The reality of her situation was settling in like poison in her veins. Through the small window in her cell door, she could see other detainees, women she would never have acknowledged existed in her regular life. A young mother arrested for shoplifting baby formula. An elderly woman caught driving without insurance because she couldn't afford the payments. Women whose desperation had led them to choices Victoria could never comprehend. Back in the courtroom, Helen Sterling remained seated in the gallery as the proceedings continued. Judge Chen had granted a brief recess, but Helen showed no signs of leaving. Maria Santos approached her hesitantly, her husband close behind. Mrs. Sterling, Maria began, her voice soft but determined. I need you to know that I don't hate your daughter. I'm angry and I'm hurt, but I don't hate her. Helen looked up, surprised by the grace in the young woman's words. You're more generous than she deserves, Miss Santos. Maybe, Maria replied, placing a protective hand over her growing belly. But hate would poison my baby. I can't carry that. She paused, studying Helen's face. Your daughter said terrible things, but you raised her. Somewhere inside there must be something worth saving. Helen's composure finally cracked, and tears she had held back for 30 years began to fall. I failed her completely. I was so busy protecting the country that I forgot to protect her from herself. It's not too late, Maria said quietly. She's going to need her mother when she realizes who she really is. Meanwhile, in her cell, Victoria was discovering exactly who she really was. The woman in the next cell was named Carmen, a single mother of 3 who had been arrested for writing bad checks to buy groceries. Victoria had initially recoiled from any interaction, but isolation was breaking down her barriers. You're the one from the courthouse, Carmen said through the metal mesh that separated their cells. Saw it on the news. Rich lady finally got what was coming to her. Victoria wanted to snap back with her usual venom, but something stopped her. Maybe it was exhaustion, or maybe it was the way Carmen said it without malice, just stating a fact. You don't understand, Victoria said weakly. My whole life is ruined. Carmen laughed, but not unkindly. Lady, your life ain't ruined. Your life is just starting. First time you're gonna have to live it instead of buying it. The words hit Victoria like a physical blow, because they carried an uncomfortable truth she wasn't ready to face. My mother betrayed me, Victoria whispered, more to herself than to Carmen. Your mother saved you, Carmen replied firmly. My mama never had the strength to tell me no, and look where it got me. Your mama's got more love for you than you know what to do with. In the courtroom, Helen was making a phone call that would change everything. Not to politicians or judges, but to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. Her daughter's store wasn't just guilty of discrimination. It was part of a larger pattern of fraud and tax evasion that the Sterling family had been hiding for years. Agent Morrison, Helen said into her secure phone, this is Deputy Director Sterling. I need to report financial crimes committed by my family's business. Yes, I know this will implicate my daughter. Do it anyway. The final piece of Victoria's protected world crumbled as federal agents arrived at Sterling Family Enterprises with search warrants and boxes for evidence. The charitable donations, the political connections, the social standing, all of it built on a foundation of lies that Helen was personally dismantling. When the news reached Victoria in her cell, she finally understood the magnitude of her mother's choice. Helen hadn't just refused to save her. She had actively ensured that Victoria would face every consequence of her actions and her family's crimes. For the first time in her life, Victoria Sterling Hawthorne was completely, utterly alone with the person she had become. 6 months later, the federal courthouse buzzed with anticipation as Victoria Sterling Hawthorne stood before Judge Robert Harrison for sentencing on multiple counts of fraud, tax evasion, and civil rights violations. The woman who had once demanded special treatment now wore a simple gray suit provided by court services, her former arrogance replaced by something that might have been wisdom. Helen Sterling sat in the front row of the gallery, her CIA badge no longer hanging from her neck. She had taken early retirement, choosing to face her own failures as a mother rather than continue protecting a country while failing to protect her daughter from herself. The decision had cost her the career that defined her, but gained her something more valuable, the possibility of redemption. Your Honor, Victoria's new attorney, a public defender who had taught her more about justice in 6 months than her expensive lawyers had in 30 years, began, My client wishes to address the court. Victoria rose slowly, her hands shaking slightly. The woman who had once screamed about her family's importance now spoke in barely audible tones. Your Honor, 6 months ago I stood in a courtroom and said things that haunt me every day. I hurt Maria Santos when she was vulnerable, and I did it because I could. Because I thought my money and my mother's position made me untouchable. She paused, glancing back at Helen, who nodded encouragingly. I've spent these months in federal detention, and I've met women who have more dignity in their little finger than I had in my entire body. Women who face impossible choices every day but still choose kindness. Women who work 3 jobs to feed their children, while I complained about charity luncheons. Maria Santos sat in the gallery with her husband and their new baby daughter. She had attended every hearing, not out of vindictiveness but because she believed in the possibility of change. Ms. Santos, Victoria continued, turning to face her former employee. I can never undo what I did to you. I can never give you back the security I stole from you when you needed it most, but I can promise you that I will spend the rest of my life making sure no one else experiences what I put you through. The courtroom was silent except for the quiet sound of Victoria's tears. I've learned that privilege isn't about what you can take from others. It's about what you can give. My mother taught me that, even though I was too arrogant to listen. Judge Harrison studied the psychological evaluations and character references that painted a picture of genuine transformation. Victoria had spent her months in detention tutoring fellow inmates, helping them prepare for GED exams and job interviews. She had donated her entire inheritance to organizations supporting pregnant women and immigrant families. Mrs. Sterling Hawthorne, Judge Harrison said, the court sentences you to 3 years in federal prison, with the possibility of supervised release after 18 months contingent on continued community service. Victoria nodded, accepting the sentence without protest. As the bailiff approached to lead her away, she turned to her mother one final time. "I love you, Mom. Thank you for saving me." Helen stood and walked to her daughter, embracing her for the first time in years. "I love you too, sweetheart. When you come home, we'll build something better together." As Victoria was led away, she passed Maria Santos, who was holding her baby daughter. For a moment, their eyes met, and Maria saw something she had never expected to see: genuine remorse and the beginning of wisdom. "Her name is Victoria," Maria said softly. "Victoria Elena Santos. I wanted her to have a strong name." Victoria stopped, overwhelmed by the grace of the gesture. A woman she had tried to destroy had named her daughter after her, transforming a symbol of cruelty into one of hope. Helen Sterling approached Maria after her daughter disappeared through the security doors. "Thank you," she said simply, "for believing people can change." Maria smiled, adjusting her baby's blanket. "Sometimes we have to fall completely apart before we can build ourselves back upright." Outside the courthouse, Helen Sterling looked up at the American flag flying in the wind and felt something she hadn't experienced in years: hope. Her daughter had a long road ahead, but for the first time she was walking it as herself rather than hiding behind privilege and power. The rich Karen had been humiliated in the courtroom, but from that humiliation, a better person was beginning to emerge. And sometimes, Helen thought, that's exactly how justice is supposed to work.